Music floated beneath the chandeliers like golden dust, settling upon silk gowns and polished shoulders while laughter rose in careful-mannered waves. The ducal ballroom glowed with candlelight reflected in mirrors tall as doors, and every surface shone with the pride of lineage. Snow gathered softly beyond the arched windows, dimming the world outside into a hush that made the interior brilliance feel almost theatrical. Ladies leaned toward one another behind jeweled fans, their whispers threading through the violins. Gentlemen stood in dark clusters, boots gleaming, watching the dancers as though observing a performance rather than participating in a celebration. It was a night constructed for admiration, for spectacle, for the quiet judgment of society dressed as delight. At the center of this brilliance stood the Duchess, serene as porcelain, her champagne gown falling in disciplined folds to the floor. Pearls rested at her throat like patient moons, and her gloved hands were folded with habitual grace. She had mastered the art of stillness, of appearing untouched by the currents that tugged at others. Those who watched her often mistook composure for coldness, never guessing how much feeling could be hidden beneath a tranquil expression. She smiled when required, inclined her head when addressed, and moved through the crowd as though guided by invisible lines drawn long ago. Across the room stood the Duke, tall, immaculately dressed, his expression carved from restraint. He spoke little, listened less, and surveyed the assembly with the distant politeness of a man fulfilling obligation. Officers and nobles gravitated toward him, eager for favor, yet he seemed faintly bored by their attention. His dark gaze occasionally crossed the room toward his wife, not with tenderness nor with irritation, but with something far more troubling, indifference carefully preserved over years. The orchestra swelled into a waltz. Couples arranged themselves upon the polished floor. Invitations were exchanged with nods and glances. The Duchess waited, as custom required, for her husband's approach. She had waited like this at countless gatherings, each time hoping for the small mercy of being chosen first. Tonight, she waited again, posture perfect, eyes calm, heart rehearsing patience. But the Duke did not move. He remained where he was, speaking to a young lady in a striking crimson gown. Her laughter rang brighter than propriety allowed, and several heads turned with interest. The Duchess saw it all without turning her head. She felt the shift in the room as whispers gathered like wind. Someone murmured behind a fan, "How unfortunate for her grace." Another voice replied softly, "He has never pretended affection." The words traveled like perfume through the air, faint yet undeniable. The Duchess kept her gaze forward. Her spine did not bend. At last the Duke crossed the floor. Relief flickered through her chest before she could restrain it. He stopped before her, offered his arm, and she accepted with measured grace. They stepped into the waltz as eyes followed them eagerly. They moved flawlessly, two figures trained by years of etiquette. His hand rested at her waist with impersonal precision. She felt no warmth through the layers of fabric. Around them, the music swelled romantically, mocking the quiet between them. "You appear unwell," he said at last, his voice low and formal. "I am quite well, Your Grace," she replied, her tone gentle. They turned once more before he spoke again. "Then you may endure a truth." She looked up at him then, meeting his eyes without fear. There was no anger there, only a cold deliberation that made her breath hesitate. "I never loved you," he said quietly, as though remarking upon the weather. The words did not echo. They fell softly between them and vanished into the music. Yet she heard nothing else afterward. Her steps continued from memory, her posture held by pride alone. Around them, conversation faltered as awareness spread with astonishing speed. Faces turned. Fans paused midair. The Duchess felt every gaze like a weight upon her shoulders. She did not release his arm. She did not stumble. Instead, she offered the faintest smile and said, "Thank you for your honesty, Your Grace." The waltz ended. Applause rose uncertainly around them. He bowed with rigid courtesy. She curtsied with perfect dignity. Without haste she left the floor. The crowd parted for her in silence. No one dared address her. She moved through the glittering hall like a queen walking away from a conquered throne. Upstairs, in her dressing chamber, she closed the door gently. Her reflection regarded her from the mirror, unchanged and unbearably calm. She removed her pearls one by one, placing them carefully upon the table. Only then did her hands begin to tremble. Not from tears, for none came, but from the effort of remaining composed for so long. She sat very still, listening to the distant music below. A knock sounded at the door. Her maid asked softly if she required assistance. "No, thank you," she replied. "Prepare my traveling clothes for morning." The maid hesitated before answering yes. The Duchess rose and crossed to the window. Snow continued to fall beyond the glass, quiet and relentless. She watched it for a long moment, then removed her wedding ring and placed it upon the sill. By dawn she would be gone, and the Duke would awaken to a silence he had never imagined. He would search for her first with irritation, then with curiosity, and finally with something far more dangerous, regret. But tonight he still stood below among the glittering guests, accepting their compliments with distant composure, unaware that the quiet woman he had dismissed was already stepping beyond the boundaries of his life. In the corridor outside her chamber, the candles flickered as though stirred by an unseen draught. She drew a cloak around her shoulders and allowed herself one slow breath of freedom before extinguishing the lights. Darkness settled gently, like mercy at last. She did not look back nor whisper farewell, for dignity required silence where love had failed. Morning entered the ducal bedchamber with a pale, indifferent light that revealed absence more clearly than darkness ever could. The fire had burned to ash. The curtains stirred faintly in a draught that had gone unnoticed through the night. The Duke woke expecting the familiar stillness beside him, the quiet presence he had long taken for granted, and found only cold sheets smoothed with unnatural care. He lay unmoving for several seconds, staring at the canopy above, as though the world might correct itself if he did not acknowledge the discrepancy. He rang the bell once, sharply. A footman arrived, eyes lowered. The Duke asked for the Duchess. The servant hesitated in a way no servant should. That hesitation traveled through the room like a crack in glass. "Her Grace retired early, Your Grace," the man said. "I am aware," the Duke replied, his tone clipped. "She is not here." A search began with orderly efficiency. Her dressing room was neat, too neat. Several gowns were missing. A small traveling case was gone. Drawers stood half-emptied with precise deliberation, as though their contents had been considered rather than hastily gathered. The Duke felt irritation rise first, sharp and defensive. This was theatrical. This was unnecessary. Then he saw the vanity. Her wedding ring lay upon the polished wood, placed beside a single pressed white rose flattened within a book of poems. He recognized the rose at once. It had come from the bouquet she carried on their wedding day. He had not known she kept it. Something tightened behind his ribs. The maid was questioned. She admitted, trembling, that the Duchess had requested traveling clothes before dawn and dismissed assistance. A carriage had been ordered quietly. No destination had been given. The Duke dismissed everyone with a gesture that concealed the sudden effort it took to breathe evenly. By midday the household knew. Servants carried news more swiftly than riders carried messages. Whispers slipped beneath doors, down staircases, through kitchens and into the stables. By afternoon, London society had caught the scent of scandal like hounds catching a trail. At his club, men approached the Duke with careful sympathy disguised as curiosity. A misunderstanding, no doubt. Her Grace has delicate sensibilities. Women are inclined to dramatics. He listened without responding. Each remark felt like grit beneath the skin. By evening, rumors had multiplied into wild invention. Some claimed she had fled to family in the countryside. Others hinted at a secret lover. One particularly bold whisper suggested she had been seen weeping at the coach station before sunrise. The Duke found himself disturbed not by the rumors themselves, but by the realization that he did not know which were impossible. He returned to her chamber alone. The room felt different without her, though nothing obvious had changed. He noticed details he had never considered. The way sunlight struck the corner chair where she read in the afternoons, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air, the embroidery hoop left upon the table with threads still caught mid-pattern. These were not grand tokens. They were small, domestic traces of a life lived quietly beside his own. He opened the drawer of her writing desk and found a sheet of paper half filled with neat script. The letter had not been finished. "I have always believed that love may be learned through patience," it read. The sentence stopped there. He stared at the words for a long time. Irritation gave way to unease. Unease softened into something heavier. He realized, with a discomfort that spread slowly through him, that she had not left in anger. She had left in acceptance. That afternoon he ordered his horse saddled. No announcement was made. No formal search party assembled. He rode out himself, coat unfastened, hat pulled low, ignoring the startled looks of the stable hands. Pride told him this was merely to end the inconvenience swiftly. Something else, unnamed, urged him forward with unfamiliar urgency. The coachman at the gate recalled a carriage departing before dawn. A guard remembered the direction taken along the eastern road. The Duke followed that road beneath a sky thick with gray clouds, the cold wind sharpening his thoughts. At a small posting in miles from the estate, he learned that a lady traveling under her maiden name had hired fresh horses. She had spoken politely, paid generously, and asked for no escort. The innkeeper remembered her because she thanked him with sincere warmth. She seemed relieved, the man said, as though the air agreed with her. Relieved. The word unsettled him more than any accusation could have. He pressed onward. Villages passed in muted succession. The world outside his title and responsibilities appeared strangely indifferent to his distress. Children played in muddy lanes. Women hung washing. Smoke rose from chimneys without regard for ducal concerns. By dusk, he reached a coastal village where the air smelled of salt and seaweed. A modest stone cottage stood near the cliffs, smoke curling gently from its chimney. He knew, with inexplicable certainty, that she was there before anyone confirmed it. He dismounted slowly. Light glowed in the cottage window. A figure moved inside, unhurried. Not a servant. Not a guest. For the first time since morning, the Duke hesitated. He removed his gloves with deliberate care, suddenly aware that the confrontation he had imagined all day no longer seemed simple. He had expected tears, reproach, perhaps indignation. Instead, he sensed a calm he did not understand. He approached the door and raised his hand to knock. Through the window, he saw her pause beside a small wooden table, a book in her hands, her expression peaceful in a way he had never witnessed within the grand walls of his estate. His knuckles hovered inches from the wood. And in that suspended moment, the Duke realized with quiet dread that he had not come to retrieve his wife from foolishness, but to face the truth of what his absence had made possible for her. He knocked at last, softly, as though the wood itself might protest a louder claim. The sound seemed swallowed by the wind coming off the sea. Inside, her movement paused. A faint scrape of chair legs followed, then footsteps unhurried and assured. When the door opened, lamplight spilled into the dusk and framed her in a quiet glow that startled him more than any reproach could have done. She wore no silk, no pearls, no emblem of rank. A simple wool dress fell to her ankles, sleeves rolled slightly as if she had been working. A loose strand of hair escaped the careful order he had always seen, and her cheeks were touched by the cold in a way that made her look vividly alive. She regarded him without shock, without alarm, as though she had expected this moment eventually. "Your Grace," she said, her voice gentle, steady as tide water. He removed his hat. "May I come inside?" She stepped aside without hesitation. The room smelled of bread and salt air. A small fire warmed the hearth and a kettle whispered softly. Books rested upon a narrow shelf. A wooden table bore signs of use rather than decoration. Everything in the cottage spoke of function, of modest comfort chosen deliberately rather than inherited without thought. He stood awkwardly near the door, suddenly aware of how much space his presence occupied. She returned to the table and closed the book she had been reading, marking her place with a strip of cloth. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet was not strained. It was simply honest. "I hope the journey was not difficult," she said. "It was necessary," he replied, unsure why the words sounded insufficient. She poured water into 2 cups and offered him one. He accepted it, surprised by the domestic simplicity of the gesture. Steam rose between them like a fragile veil. "I did not intend to cause scandal," she continued calmly. "But I could not remain after understanding so clearly." He knew what she meant. The ballroom returned to him with painful clarity. "You left without a word." "I believed you," she said. The statement landed with unexpected force. He looked at her, searching for accusation, but found none. Only sincerity. "You believed that I never loved you," he said. "Yes." There was no bitterness in the answer. Only acceptance so complete it unsettled him. He set the cup down carefully. "You might have argued." "To what purpose?" she asked softly. "You were honest at last. It seemed discourteous to contradict you." A faint wind rattled the window pane. He noticed how comfortable she appeared in this small room, how naturally she moved within it. She belonged here in a way she had never appeared to belong in the grand halls of his estate. "You seem, well," he said, the observation slipping out before he could restrain it. "I am," she replied, and the quiet certainty in her voice pierced him more sharply than reproach. He studied her as though seeing her for the first time. The calmness he had once mistaken for detachment now appeared as strength. The composure he had thought coldness now seemed like discipline learned through long endurance. "I did not know you were unhappy," he admitted. She tilted her head slightly. "I was not unhappy. I was hopeful." The distinction confused him. She saw it in his expression and offered a small, patient smile. I believed affection might grow through patience, she said. I mistook silence for possibility. He remembered the unfinished letter. The sentence halted mid-thought. A weight settled into his chest. I never meant to wound you publicly, he said. She regarded him steadily. You did not wound me, Your Grace. You freed me from misunderstanding. The fire cracked softly behind them. Shadows flickered along the stone walls. He felt as though the world he understood was shifting in quiet, irreversible ways. I have come to ask you to return, he said at last, the purpose of his journey gathering into words. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out toward the darkening sea. He watched the outline of her figure against the glass, aware of how distant she felt despite standing only steps away. I do not think I can, she said. He felt a surprising jolt of alarm. You are my wife. Yes, she agreed. And I fulfilled that role with dignity. But I cannot resume it without losing something I have only just discovered. He struggled to understand. What have you discovered? She turned to face him, her expression open and unguarded. That I am more than a title waiting to be acknowledged. The words were not defiant. They were simply true. He realized then that he had never asked what she desired, what she feared, what she loved. Their marriage had been conducted like a formal treaty, observed with precision, devoid of curiosity. I thought indifference was kindness, he confessed quietly. I believed leaving you untroubled was a form of respect. She shook her head gently. Indifference is a colder cruelty than anger. Silence fell again, but this time it felt charged with understanding. He saw, with painful clarity, how his careful distance had been interpreted as rejection long before he had spoken the words aloud. I was wrong, he said. She nodded once, acknowledging the admission without triumph. Yes. The simplicity of it humbled him. Outside, the sea wind rose, pressing faintly against the cottage walls. He felt the urgency of time slipping away, the realization that if he left now without changing something fundamental, he might never bridge the distance between them. What would persuade you to return? He asked. She studied him with thoughtful eyes. I do not wish to be persuaded. I wish to be wanted. The distinction struck him with profound force. Wanted, not required. Desired, not tolerated. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And if I told you I find your absence intolerable? She held his gaze, searching for something beyond the words. I would ask whether that is loneliness or love. He opened his mouth to answer, and found that he did not yet know. Dawn thinned the darkness over the sea, turning the horizon into a pale ribbon of silver that trembled beneath a restless sky. The Duke had not slept. He remained seated by the cottage hearth long after the fire collapsed into embers, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing from the small adjoining room. Each exhale seemed to measure the distance between what he had been and what he must become. Pride, which had governed him for years with silent authority, felt suddenly like an ill-fitting garment he could no longer bear to wear. When she emerged, wrapped in a simple shawl, surprise flickered across her features at finding him still there. He rose at once as though caught in some private trespass. Morning light softened her face, and for a moment neither spoke, acknowledging the fragile newness of this shared stillness. I leave for London today, he said carefully. There are matters I must address before I return. She studied him with quiet attention. Return? Yes, he replied. Not to retrieve you. To stand before you differently. She did not interrupt, but something cautious shifted in her expression, like a door opening only an inch. I have conducted my life as though affection were a distraction from duty, he continued. I see now that duty without affection is merely performance. I have performed my role as Duke with excellence. I have failed as your husband with equal precision. The words were difficult, unpolished, but sincere. She listened without attempting to soften the truth for him. What will you do in London? She asked. He drew a breath that seemed to steady him from within. I will end what should never have begun. I will correct what should never have been tolerated. And I will allow society to witness what I should have confessed long ago. A faint line appeared between her brows. You intend to make a spectacle of us? No, he said quietly. I intend to make a spectacle of myself. The distinction lingered between them. She nodded once, acknowledging the intention without yet believing its promise. He departed shortly afterward, the sound of his horse fading into the wind. She stood in the doorway long after he vanished from sight, uncertain whether hope had returned or merely changed its shape. The sea moved endlessly before her, indifferent to human hesitation. London received him with the same glittering indifference it offered all its aristocrats. Carriages rolled across cobblestones, invitations were exchanged, and gossip continued its elegant dance from salon to drawing room. Yet his arrival stirred particular interest. Word of the Duchess's disappearance had ripened into scandal, and eyes followed him with open curiosity. That evening he attended a gathering where the young woman in crimson was present. Her laughter rang as brightly as before, though it faltered when she noticed his expression. He approached her not with courtesy but with clarity. "You have been treated with unfair familiarity," he said evenly. "I allowed it. That was my failing, not yours. It ends tonight." Her confusion quickly shifted into embarrassment as surrounding guests strained to overhear. He did not lower his voice. "Let them listen. Let them carry this tale through the city's veins. I have wronged my wife," he continued. "You were merely a distraction from a truth I refused to face." He bowed and walked away, leaving whispers to ignite behind him like dry leaves catching flame. The following morning he cancelled political engagements that had been arranged for months. He dismissed several social invitations with unprecedented bluntness. Then he did something far more shocking. He requested that the upcoming spring ball at his estate proceed exactly as planned. Servants were bewildered. Nobles were intrigued. Invitations remained valid. Speculation surged. 3 days later he returned to the coast with a carriage filled not with luxuries, but with objects carefully chosen. Her favorite books from the library, the shawl she wore during winter evenings, and fresh roses from the estate garden. When he arrived, she was tending a small patch of soil beside the cottage, sleeves rolled once more, fingers stained with earth. He approached slowly, removing his gloves as before. She rose to her feet, watching him with quiet reserve. "I have done what I said I would," he told her. She searched his face for signs of performance, finding none. "What now?" she asked. He stepped closer, placing the roses gently upon the low stone wall. "Now I ask you to attend the spring ball as my guest." Her breath caught slightly. "As your Duchess? As the woman I hope to deserve." The wind lifted the edge of her shawl. She looked toward the sea, then back at him, weighing the request not as a duty but as a choice. Finally she nodded. The night of the ball arrived with brilliant clarity. Chandeliers blazed once more. Music filled the hall. The same aristocrats gathered, their curiosity sharpened to a fine edge. When the doors opened and she entered beside him, a hush fell over the room so complete it felt almost reverent. She wore no excessive jewels, only quiet elegance. He did not release her arm as they walked through the crowd. Faces turned. Fans paused. Conversations died mid-sentence. At the center of the ballroom, beneath the same ceiling where he had humiliated her, he stopped. The orchestra faltered uncertainly. Every eye watched. He turned to her, then deliberately to the crowd. "I owe my wife an apology," he said, his voice carrying through the vast hall without strain. "Not in private, where pride might soften truth, but here, where I once allowed cruelty to masquerade as honesty." A tremor moved through the guests like a shared breath. "I told her I never loved her," he continued. "I believed it at the time. I was wrong not because I lied, but because I had never permitted myself to understand what love required." He faced her fully now, the world fading behind them. "I did not love you when I should have," he said softly. "I love you now when I must." The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. And in that suspended moment, the Duchess realized the entire room had vanished from her awareness, leaving only the man before her, waiting not as a duke, but as a husband daring to hope. That if you like my content, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments.